Thank you, Melissa. Thank you, everyone, for joining. It's been a great conference so far. I hope you've been enjoying it as much as I have. And briefly before I start, here in America, we are in a federal holiday, Veterans Day. And personally, I was raised by one parent who was a pacifist, and the other parent and two older siblings who served in the Army. And so, whatever my politics are, whatever I believe in the political choices of our leaders, this holiday is not about that. This holiday is about the service people who have committed to putting their lives on the line to protect the country I live in and the rights and responsibilities I live under. And so thank you to all of the veterans. So today, for this session, I am only briefly going to touch on some of these slides. I'm hoping to leave a nice chunk for conversation so that you can help point out the issues and specific examples you may want to hear more about or talk more about or share your examples with as well. Structure, a little bit about the pedagogical backgrounds. You can read more about that later. The slides are in HiEd. And then some of the examples, I'm only going to touch on 3 of those. We'll leave some of the more common ones that folks may already be doing for discussion offline. And then a tiny bit on the model for customizing this for your courses or programs and for your own teaching philosophy. So when we're talking about the foundations for higher ed, one of the things that's very common across all disciplines is critical thinking. We know we want to encourage it. We don't always know how or what are some of the great examples or different ways we can take from each other in how to do that. And critical thinking is also about deep learning and engagement. And we've heard this word engagement. For those of us like myself who have taught online for a long time, engagement is a keynote. It's really important keyword for online learning. But we've heard this even more and more and more since the COVID situation. So critical thinking, you can read the definition here from a Delphi panel of experts that's really foundational. There's been a lot that's been done since. And critical thinking has really been reflected in a lot of the requirements for accreditation in certain programs and core competencies for professions. And it's really a combination of certain types of skills and temperament. Now, if we look at the scholarship of teaching and learning on how to foster a critical thinking, and these are just examples, they're certainly not exhaustive. We're talking about problem-based learning with case studies and role-playing, problem solving, and problem creation. We're talking about mentoring by not just the teacher, but peers and with real life experience. And we're talking about discourse, all different types of discourse, small group discussion, peer access with each other's ideas, either asynchronously or synchronously, Socratic method, debate, things like that. And for critical thinking, a real necessary corollary is deep self-regulated learning. It's about students and learners working to figure out how to do critical thinking on their own, so then they can, by extension, do that when they're on the job, when they've left school and they keep being these critical lifelong learners. And Biggs and Tang is one of my favorite books to really work with. So you'll have these references in the slides at the bottom. So if we can think of knowledge as declarative and functioning, and declarative is really necessary. There are certain foundational facts that different disciplines need their graduates to have. But we desperately need functioning knowledge, meaning not just what you know, but what can you do with what you know? And deep self-regulated learning involves a lot of those higher order cognitive tasks that a lot of us may be thinking of as Bloom's taxonomy and everything that evolved from Bloom's. And we also may connect it with our concepts of academic rigor, thinking about real cognitive complexity and things like that. So deep learning means fostering that higher level self-regulated way of studying. And it's about self-explanation. Can you explain this to yourself? Not just what you read, but can you just use your own words, explain it? Can you explain it to someone else? Elaborative interrogation, examples and problem solving, interleaf practice. I'm not going to read them all, but you'll see the comparison similar to some of the ways to help with critical thinking. And a lot of this is connected with constructivist philosophies of teaching, which is something that I really base a lot of my work on. So open learning activities. Let's get to some examples. Now, so my basis, like I said, it's constructivism, but also UDL and open education. And the really funny thing is when I was using the support of PowerPoint to make this slide and get a recommendation for the graphic, when I put that title up there, the recommended graphic was a teacher with a pointer on a chalkboard with students lined up linearly in front. So we still haven't taught our technologies how to match up well to our modern ways of wanting to teach this way. So let's talk a little bit about these three examples and my approach. So my emphases are on accessibility, student agency, active learning, aligning the curricula throughout the program, so across courses, interleaved and spaced practice, authentic and applied assignments, transparency of learning theories. And you'll see this a lot. It's about talking about the pedagogy with the students before, during, and after, and metacognition and reflection. So these first three examples I will run through quickly. The last three we'll leave unless folks want to talk about them more in the chat. I have personally used all of these in various classes, and each time you use it is a way to make it better. But I've only once ever used these only face-to-face. So these can be used in hybrid, Hyflex, online, as well as traditional face-to-face. First example, quiz making. So I pulled this and built my assignment from work from Rajiv Jangjani from Kwantlen Polytechnic, and he's an open education, active learning enthusiast. He's used this activity in very large classes, intro to psych, really big classes, and I've also used it in smaller classes. And for each one of these slides, you'll see on the left-hand side, UG or G for undergrad and grad, face-to-face, the type of modality, large classes, small classes, and these are recommendations, right? You can get creative and use it in any way that will work for you. So, but these are ones that are recommended based upon my personal experience and the experience of those I know who have used the same assignment in their classes. So basically, the students are making the multiple choice questions and they're sharing them with each other, or they're sharing them with small groups if they're in large groups, or they're with the whole class if not. They get formative feedback. They get to practice this. They have a discussion of pedagogy before it even happens. And then for a very long period over the term, it's 2 questions a week based on a week's learning. And we have check-ins partway through. There could be peer reviews. And it's important to have a significant weight, that this is a lot of work. It's not easy. We actually have a class on how to make a good multiple choice question, which actually puts it back on the teacher and maybe your peer teachers who may not be so happy that you're giving these secrets away to the students about what's good and what's not so good, because the students will be definitely saying, ooh, that's not so good. Good question, Maeve. But it's a great way for them to give me good feedback and to see that we're all part of the learning exercise together. And then there's also the metacognitive reflection at the end, that they think about, what did I learn by doing this activity? Did it help me learn better? Can I do this myself as self-regulated deep learning in other classes? Now, this one I want to spend a little bit more time on because it's become my favorite and my students' favorite. And I think it's probably become my favorite because it's become my students' favorite. It was recently shared with me by a fellow teacher that they have students asking them for this type of a model. So the on-call days, a lot of us have had those classes where we may only meet once a week. And especially for undergrad, it's really difficult. And for undergrad, if you aren't ready and you're for class and you're afraid the teacher's going to call on you, what are they going to do? They're going to skip class, and they'll lose even more by missing that 3 hour of dialogue that week, which if you're Hyflex, they may be able to get some out from the asynchronous engagement, but maybe not if they're not prepared to do that deep learning on their own to get out of it. So especially for the younger learners who have less experience in how to do this self-regulated learning, I found this on-call day really useful. And this is basically at the beginning of the class, you're setting small groups of students to be pre-assigned to be on call, and you promise you will not be calling on them unless they are on call that day. And they're on call once before midterm, once after midterm. They can volunteer anytime they want to. And I actually did see an increase of volunteering after implementing this. But I pair this with a flipped concept of required journaling. So 2 days before that class that meets, all the students have to submit something in a large class to a small group discussion board, or in a small class to a class-wide discussion board, where they actually have to do something applied, not just what did you think about today's reading or this week's readings or this week's materials, but pick one thing out of the materials. And for example, in a class on I did a class on Homeland Security, law and policy, and we were studying the US Constitution. And okay, so how does Article 1 apply to something in current events related to Homeland Security? So it was a guided journaling assignment each week so that it would help them with the applied or extrapolation level of thinking that we want to encourage. And why 48 hours before? Well, it's flipped. It helps them organize their time, but it also gives those students who are on call that resource content of their peers to build their knowledge and to feel more confident. And anything can happen on those on-call days. We can have a debate, we can do role playing, we could ask students to lead groups. There's lots of different things which help play up the differences and give students more activity and variety of assignments. It's also a way that for asynchronous online, you would need a little bit more time and customization for what's expected of on-call days, but you can build those in advance if you have students in a Hyflex mode who may only be participating asynchronously, especially because when they are on call, they know well in advance, they have access to everything they need in advance, they have access to you if they have questions, and so they can really take the reins and share this. Preparatory activity is, again, talking about the pedagogy, talking about what the expectations are, rules of engagement. Practice with a technology. If you're not using the discussion board in your learning management system, maybe you're using a different app, making sure everyone has access and knows how to use it. Discussion of the rubrics for evaluation. General check-ins, and then again at the end, it's a significant weight. The journaling is a lot of work. The on-call is a lot of work. Metacognitive reflection. What did you get out of the journaling? I've gotten tons of students saying that, you know, I'm using this now in other classes. I'm using this in my biology class because it's helping me to parse what I'm trying to learn this week. We're not sharing it necessarily with everybody, but we at least get that deep learning practice of self-regulated learning. And then the other thing is, in professions, when these students are out in the real world, and some of them already are, they're working professionals, no one ever has the answers themselves, and you've got to know who to go to. So I also discuss at the very beginning of a semester, when this is used, and get consent from all students, to use something called a lifeline in any exam. So the students can pick one question, the one that they're least confident about themselves, and they can say, I think Mary Jones knows the answer to this. And if Mary Jones got it right, then they get the credit for that. There's no points if they got it wrong. It's just a boost. But what does that do? It makes them much more engaged in listening to their peers when they're not on call, because they want to know who the experts are on certain topics in their class. And then the final example is the jigsaw technique with role playing. And some of you may be familiar with this. You have different roles, probably not more than 5 or 6, because you want to have consistency of understanding, everyone understanding what these roles are and how they play. Especially for undergrad students, you may want character sheets for each role to help them understand what that role does within an organization or within a jurisdiction. And the students can meet together in the same role to become experts. What is it that we're doing? What is our job in this scenario or situation? And then they disperse out, and each subgroup, new group that's created, has one role from each of those expert areas. And you give them a scenario, a medical case, some sort of problem to solve, a disaster that has to be responded to, let's say, if they're in emergency management. You can have the same scenario, or you can have different scenarios depending. I find, especially for undergraduate students not familiar with so much, having the same scenario can be easier. Graduate students having different scenarios is really exciting. And there's report back. One of the things I've added on that I used when I was in Sweden was having one of these character roles secretly assigned to be an observer who's basically making, writing down how the group is working. So how are decisions made? How does the group interact? Are there emerging leaders? Are people following? Are people questioning? Is it open for critique? And it's a discussion when you're trying to encourage team playing and collaborative learning, especially for a certain profession, can be useful. So again, you need class discussion on what this is for and the pedagogical backgrounds, time to understand the scenarios, and time to work through it and learn from it. We have 3 other techniques, which I'm going to skip over for now, and the model for customization. No matter how much or how little of things like this you want to use, you want to start with the considerations of each course or each program. The levels of learners, types of learners, backgrounds, demands of the profession, and the specific modality. But you need all that other stuff first. You don't start with the modality, but you also should include the teaching philosophies of the instructors. Well, that's great. We can make that list, but then what do? Well, we work on identifying the scholarship of teaching and learning that supports the considerations that you want and have for your students. You want to compare those theories and distill them and see what are the common things that you can pull out, consolidate them, and then select those bits that you believe are most useful and that you have the resources and capacity yourself to implement, which may mean just for a certain assignment, or it may mean a complete redesign of a whole program. I actually did this in designing a whole program from scratch at the graduate online level. And then you have to implement it, of course, and learn from the implementation phase. So I will leave you with the example to run through yourself. This is the example of the master's program that we did this for. And here's our chart of the different philosophies once it was narrowed down, where some of them are, yes, absolutely, we're supporting the considerations of your learning and teaching group with these, or maybe in certain circumstances it supports. And the 3 themes that came out of this were access and engagement, application and extrapolation, and agency and empowerment. We talk a lot about the first and the third in a lot of our open education and UDL discussions, and application and extrapolation are especially emphasized in discussions of what our professions need. And I will not go through every slide, but in each one of these, it's bolded where the critical thinking is emphasized. So these types of things that specifically help with critical thinking. And the important thing when you implement it is you may only do it with one activity, not all. That's totally fine. But it's also important to think about your teaching philosophies when you go into the chart, the teaching philosophies of you, the teaching philosophies of other teachers who may be teaching in this program. And finally, it's a lot of work, just like everything is that we're talking with open. So stagger your work based upon available resources. And if you can, try to apply all of this, not only to your students as learners, but to your peer teachers. I have a lightning talk on a workbook that we use to apply some of this the same way, because encouraging access and engagement and agency across the program is as much about teachers as it is the students. And in the slides, which you can download, I have my citations and my contact information. So I'll stop sharing now because I would love for anyone to point out any of the specific activities that they'd like to talk more about. Are you more interested in the jigsaw? Are you more interested in the on-call days? Have you done something similar? Does it work? Does it not? I threw a lot at you. I'm happy to go back through some of them. Go ahead and vote. You can just poke in the chat any extra ones you may want to have me go over. I can talk a little bit about the teacher access and engagement if you'd like.
Hi, Maeve.
Yes. Hi, Roberta.
Hi. I would like to learn a little more about the quizzing activity that you do.
Absolutely.
Do you do this in the Hyflex environment? Are students sharing these questions live through a discussion forum? Are there, yep, co-editing them? Can you talk a little more about that?
Absolutely. Thanks, Roberta. So the way I've done it is the students, we have a class that's live where we talk about it. We explain it. We go through the pedagogy of it, and we practice doing it like in peers, sort of like the think, pair, share thing, but they're actually making up some questions. That class includes training on how to make a good STEM, how to make good bad answers, right? That aren't tricky, but are substantive. And it means that to get the right answer, you have to know your stuff, not just because you're really good at gaming the multiple choice system. So they get some training on that, which can be done in a flipped way. You can have them go through that training ahead of time. It can be done completely asynchronously as well. So you can have the full Hyflex model. And then the way I've done it is that the students submit this via a discussion board. And if you're in a really large class, they can submit it in groups of discussion boards. So they're not overwhelmed with, 2 times 100 students submitting in a massive discussion board, because you really want them to engage. And so if you've got a small enough group in your large classes, or you have a small class, you can do it in a discussion board, and it's very simple. You have them not use any fancy formatting, right? You just have, the STEM, the 4 choices, and the first one has an asterisk, meaning this is the right choice. And they can give each other feedback. You can include actual peer review and peer evaluation. So part of the, not just formative feedback, but they're getting grades from each other in this as well. It all depends. And I have some questions relating to hybrid and Hyflex. How do I do the folks? Yes. So in my classes where I've done hybrid, so let's all use this. We're throwing words out there, and everyone has defined them differently in every institution. So when I say hybrid, it means that I have students physically in a classroom, and I have students connecting synchronously via Zoom. If it's Hyflex, you have students in a classroom connecting synchronously via Zoom, and you may have some students who are completely studying asynchronously, either because they're ill or they have some other reason why they cannot be joining synchronously or in class. And how do I coordinate their interaction? Well, it really depends on your resources available to you. We do not have at my university a lot of tech support. So I had to learn the system really, really well several years ago when I started doing this. And it's a matter of being able to change your approach on the fly. Some days there were 2 people in the classroom and 27 connecting remotely. Some days there were 20 in the classroom and 9 connecting remotely, and some who were asynchronous next week playing catch up. And it's really about becoming okay with that and not trying to control it. You can control it. I have fellow teachers who mandate that students sign up for one or the other because they want to be sure to have X number of students in each group. But that really takes away from the agency of the students and their accessibility, if you're thinking about UDL, of how well that they can choose on the fly how they want to engage and participate depending upon their circumstances. So yes, some are synchronous and some are remote. And before COVID, I had a microphone I would even pass around in class when the remote students couldn't hear too well in a certain classroom because the overhead speakers were bad. And it's about really getting to know the environment that you're talking in, as well as being flexible on the fly to be able to, so it means you've planned ahead. You've thought about those what ifs. I didn't have to change anything due to the COVID pivot because I was already teaching everything online. And all my classes are currently asynchronous online. But I did have to change in how much I made myself available to some of my peers who were like, whoa, I'm not an online teacher. I'm like, no, but you're a teacher. And your teaching philosophies can be used in the online situation. And it's a matter of thinking about how and being prepared, thinking about all the what ifs. What if the learning management system goes down? Several years ago, due to Amazon Web Services, Canvas went down and a whole big chunk went down on the East Coast and wasn't available. So what do you do then? What if? We happened to have a midterm that day. Thankfully, I was prepared because I'm actually working cybersecurity. So those big what ifs are a big what if for me. But thinking about what could go wrong, not just from an infrastructure point of view, but from your students' point of view. What if they get sick? What if it takes them 2 weeks to get back to class? How can you encourage them to catch up? How can your peer students help them catch up? How can you use all of those things you identified in that chart of your teaching philosophies? How can any of that help in those changed circumstances? Does that help? What hybrid pairings have you found to work together well? Richard, I'm not quite sure what you're asking. You're welcome, Angie. Richard, if you're there, feel free to either type your clarification or just unmute and pop in. Hybrid pairings. Where am I going to take this work next? I am working on, thank you, Greg. I am working on actually writing this up. I joined UNH in 2017 to create this new degree program and to build the faculty for it, this master's program. And so my scholarship has been all invested in the program and all of the OER. It's a complete OER program before anyone in New Hampshire was even called zero textbook degree. The whole degree is OER, but that means all my scholarship is built into the learning management system. So right now, now that crazy time has been more established and we've got a bit more of an even keel and we're starting to see this, we're starting to get the numbers to maybe have a little bit of SOTL research, scholarship of teaching and learning research down the road to see the applicability and the different modalities that might help with that. So I'm working on translating this into scholarship. There is also the Open Education notebook, which is Rajiv and Robin DeRosa's project. So I am planning on submitting some of these activities there so that there's a wider audience to folks who may want to use some of this stuff like the on-call days and the journaling. You're welcome, Richard. Is there a synchronous lecture component? It all depends. Thank you, Skanda. It depends because in some classes, if it's flipped, then it's a recorded rather than synchronous mini lecture, right? Or the time when the teacher sort of the transmission aspect of knowledge happens. I try to limit that as much as possible. I try that none of that is too much. You have a little bit more in your undergraduate classes when they have a lot more of the facts that they need. And I would say that if I have a class of 3 hours, the mini lectures might be 10, at the most 15 minutes in the first half, and then 10 to 15 in the second half, depending upon the level of the learner and how much support they need in connecting the dots. Because most often for my classes, it's not factual conveyance, it's connecting the dots. So what does this really mean from last week? And where are we going with this? And how does this connect to the other classes you're taking in this degree or in this major?
I'm going to interrupt just to stop the recording, but I will